The ground was still frozen when they dragged him to the open field. Dozens of free men had gathered in a wide circle, breath hanging in the cold air like smoke. No one spoke. At the center stood two figures, each holding a sword and three wooden shields. Between them, the earth had been marked with stakes driven into an ox hide stretched flat across the mud. One of the men had called the other a coward 3 days earlier at a feast. The word he used was not a casual insult. It was a word that, in their world, carried the weight of a death sentence. A single word that could strip a man of his name, his property, his family, and his right to exist among other human beings. The accused had two choices: fight or be declared something worse than dead. He chose to fight, and within minutes, his blood was soaking into that ox hide while the crowd watched in silence. Not with horror, not with shock, with approval. Because this was not senseless violence. This was the law. And in the world of the Vikings, the law was not written on parchment by scholars in quiet rooms. It was carried in the memory of men who stood before open assemblies and recited it from beginning to end without a single written word. It was enforced not by guards or prisons, but by the community itself. And it was, by any measure we understand today, more brutal, more personal, and more absolute than anything the modern world has ever produced. This is not a story about savage warriors with no rules. It is the opposite. This is the story of a legal system so deeply woven into daily life that a man could kill another in broad daylight and walk away free, while another man could be sentenced to social death for stealing a neighbor's sheep. A system where your words could get you killed faster than your sword, where women had rights that would not reappear in Europe for another 800 years, and where the worst punishment was not execution, but something far more terrifying. This is the Viking Code, and it was real. To understand how the Vikings governed themselves, you first have to abandon every assumption you have about law and order. There were no police. There were no courts in the way we understand them. There were no written statutes for most of the Viking Age, which stretched from roughly 793 to 1066 AD. And yet, across Scandinavia and the Norse settlements that spread from Iceland to the coast of North America, from the rivers of Russia to the shores of the Mediterranean, a Viking society functioned with a coherent legal framework that historians now recognize as one of the most sophisticated of the early medieval world. At the center of this system was an institution called the Thing. The Old Norse word is thing, and it referred to an assembly of free men who gathered at regular intervals to make laws, settle disputes, and pass judgment on the accused. Every community had a local thing. Larger regions had regional things. And in Iceland, beginning in 930 AD, there was the Althing, a national assembly that is now recognized as one of the oldest parliamentary institutions in the world. The Thing was not a quiet affair. It was part courtroom, part marketplace, part festival. Traders brought goods, families reunited, alliances were formed. But at its core, the Thing existed for one purpose: to prevent the endless cycle of blood feuds that would destroy a society built on honor and revenge. Because that was the fundamental tension at the heart of Viking culture. Honor demanded that wrongs be avenged. If a man killed your brother, you were expected to kill that man or a member of his family in return. Not optional, expected, by law. The Old Gulating Act, one of Norway's oldest collections of laws, written down around the 9th or 10th century, made this explicit. Vengeance was not just acceptable, it was a legal obligation. A man who failed to avenge a wrong done to his family was considered weak, and weakness in the Viking world was a kind of death all by itself. But if every killing demanded another killing, the cycle would never end. But entire families could be wiped out over a single dispute that started with a stolen cow or an insult spoken at the wrong moment. The Thing was designed to break that cycle, not by eliminating violence, but by channeling it. When a dispute came before the Thing, a figure called the law speaker presided. This was not a judge in the modern sense. The law speaker's role was to recite the law from memory, the entire body of law. In Iceland, this recitation took 3 years to complete, with the law speaker delivering 1/3 of the legal code at each annual Althing. There were no written records. There were no law books. The law existed only in the mind of the man who carried it, and if that man died before passing it on, the law died with him. The law speaker did not decide cases. That fell to the assembly itself, or to panels of respected men who heard testimony, weighed evidence, and rendered judgment. Witnesses were called. Oaths were sworn, often on sacred rings dedicated to the god Uller. And those oaths carried real weight, because in a society without written contracts, a man's word was the only currency that mattered. Swearing a false oath was not just dishonest. It was a crime that could lead to outlawry. The punishments that emerged from the thing followed a clear hierarchy. At the bottom were fines. The Vikings used a system called virgild, which translates roughly to man price. Every person in Norse society had a monetary value determined by their social status. If you injured or killed someone, you were required to pay their family a specific amount. A freed thrall was worth less than a farmer. A farmer was worth less than a chieftain. And, remarkably, the Norwegian guillotine law specified that even a king was subject to these fines. The king was not above the law. He paid more, in fact, than anyone else. If a king wounded a man, the required compensation was 576 ore, compared to 12 ore for a freed thrall. The higher your status, the higher the price of your misconduct. This was not equality as we understand it, but it was a system that applied to everyone, including those in power. Above fines came lesser outlawry, a sentence of banishment lasting 3 years. During this period, the convicted person had to leave the community. Their property might be partially confiscated, but after 3 years, they could return. It was a harsh sentence, but survivable. And then came the punishment that Vikings feared more than the blade of a sword: full outlawry. In Old Norse, the word was skosjang, which translates literally to going into the forest. The person sentenced to full outlawry became a skogarmother, a man of the forest. And that term was not poetic. It was a description of what awaited them. A fully outlawed man lost everything. His property was seized. His family ties were legally severed. Anyone who sheltered him, fed him, or aided him in any way risked the same punishment. And here is the part that made outlawry worse than execution. Anyone could kill an outlaw without legal consequence. He had no protection under the law. He was, in the most literal sense possible, no longer a person. He was a vargur, the Old Norse word for both wolf and outlaw, an animal to be hunted. Scholars describe this as social death. In a world where identity was defined by your family, your community, and your reputation, being cut off from all three was not just punishment, it was annihilation. You ceased to exist in every way that mattered. Some historians believe that stories of trolls and monsters lurking in the forests of Scandinavia may have originated as tales about outlaws, desperate men living like animals on the edges of civilization, feared and despised by everyone who encountered them. And yet, some of the most famous figures in Viking history were outlaws. Eric the Red was banished from Norway for killing, then banished again from Iceland for more killing. His outlawry forced him to sail west, where he discovered Greenland and established the first Norse settlement there. His son, Leif Erikson, all would later reach North America. The discovery of an entire continent began with a man who had been thrown out of 2 countries for being unable to control his temper. Egil Skallagrimsson, one of the great warrior poets of the Icelandic sagas, was also declared an outlaw after offending King Eric Bloodaxe. His saga remains one of the most important literary works of medieval Scandinavia. But for most people, outlawry was a death sentence. Not quick, not clean, but slow and absolute. Now, if fines could not resolve a dispute and the thing had not yet been convened, there existed another path. A path that sits at the very heart of Viking legal culture and reveals more about their understanding of justice than perhaps anything else. The holmgang. And the word translates to island going, and it referred to a formalized duel fought under strict rules. In theory, any free person could challenge another to a holmgang, regardless of their difference in social status. The reasons could be anything: a matter of honor, a property dispute, a debt unpaid, an insult that demanded blood. A man could even fight a holmgang to defend the honor of his wife or avenge a friend. The rules were specific. Once a challenge was issued, the duel had to take place within 3 to 7 days. The combat area was marked, often on an oxhide stake to the ground. Each combatant was allowed 3 shields. Strikes were taken in turns, with the challenged man striking first. The duel could end at first blood, or it could end with death. It depended on the specific rules agreed upon beforehand and the severity of the dispute. If the person challenged failed to appear, the consequences were devastating. He would be declared a nidingur, a word that carried more destructive power than any weapon in the Viking arsenal. To be called a nidingur meant you were a coward, a man without honor, a person so fundamentally broken that you could no longer function in Norse society. The word is related to the Old Norse nid, meaning defamation or calumny, and its implications went far beyond a simple insult. A nidingur had no right to swear oaths. He could not bear witness in legal proceedings. He was, for all practical purposes, erased. The Swedish Hednalagen, a fragment from a Viking Age law document, spelled it out clearly. Oh, if the insulted man arrives at the appointed place, and the man who spoke the insult does not, then the insulted man shall cry nidingur 3 times and make a mark in the ground. And the one who spoke but did not stand behind his words was considered worse than the one he had tried to shame. But the holmgang system was not perfect. Over time, professional duelists began exploiting it as a form of legalized robbery. Skilled fighters would deliberately provoke disputes, challenge weaker men, and claim their property after winning the duel. The sagas describe berserkers who abused holmgang in exactly this way, traveling from settlement to settlement and stripping families of their land and possessions through combat they had no chance of winning. This exploitation eventually led to the holmgang's abolition. Iceland banned it in 1006 AD, following a particularly famous duel between 2 poets, Gunnlaug Serpent Tongue and Hrafn Onundarson, whose holmgang over a woman ended in death and reignited the very kind of blood feud the system was supposed to prevent. Norway followed in 1014. The system designed to prevent feuds had itself become a source of injustice. But its abolition did not happen overnight. For years, the old customs persisted alongside the new laws, and men who had grown up settling their disputes on ox hides found themselves forced to argue with words in assemblies instead. The transition was messy, contested, and deeply resented by warriors who saw the holmgang as their birthright. And this brings us to what may be the most surprising aspect of the Viking Code: the role of words. In our world, words are cheap, so you can insult someone on the street and face no legal consequence. In the Viking world, words could kill. Not metaphorically, literally. Certain categories of insults were considered so severe that they legally justified a violent response, including death. The most dangerous insults attacked a man's masculinity or honor. Calling someone arger or rager, words that implied cowardice or effeminacy, was not casual name-calling. It was a legal offense. The Gulathing law from Norway and other regional codes specified that certain insults were so serious they warranted immediate retaliation. If someone called you arger and you did not respond with violence, either on the spot or by demanding a holmgang, your failure to act proved the insult was true. You had accepted your own dishonor. The Icelandic legal codes went further. Composing a love poem about someone could be punished with outlawry. Not a satirical poem, not a mocking verse, a love poem. The logic was that publicly declaring romantic feelings for another person's spouse or daughter damaged that family's honor in a way that demanded legal remedy. Even physical representations of shame carried legal weight. A nidstong, or nithing pole, was a carved pole mounted with a horse's head and pointed toward the home of a person you wished to curse and dishonor. The sagas describe instances where 2 such poles were arranged to suggest a sexual act, a gesture so profoundly insulting that it could trigger blood feuds lasting generations. In Egil's saga, the warrior poet Egil Skallagrimsson famously erected a nithing pole against King Eric Bloodaxe and Queen Gunhild, mounting a horse's head on the pole and speaking a curse that was intended to drive the land spirits against the royal couple. This was not superstition. It was a legally recognized act of public shaming, a weapon wielded through symbol and ritual rather than steel. Women, too, wielded the power of words. The sagas are filled with women who use taunts and insults to goad their male relatives into action. A mother might shame her son for sitting by the fire instead of seeking vengeance. A wife might question her husband's courage in front of other men. These were not casual remarks. They were strategic deployments of the same honor system that governed the entire legal code, and they were devastatingly effective. This obsession with words and honor was not irrational. In a society without police or prisons, Reputation was the only thing preventing chaos. Your word was your contract, your name was your credit, your honor was your shield. If any of those could be destroyed by a casual insult with no consequence, the entire system collapsed. The severity of punishment for insults was not brutality for its own sake. It was architecture. It held the building together. But the Viking Code was not exclusively a male domain, and this is where it defies nearly every expectation shaped by popular culture. Women in Norse society held legal rights that were extraordinary for the medieval world. A woman could own property. She could inherit wealth. She could initiate divorce from her husband, and the grounds for divorce included remarkably practical complaints. If a husband failed to provide for the household or was absent for extended periods, his wife could dissolve the marriage and claim her share of the property. The Icelandic Gragas law codes, which recorded many Viking-age legal traditions, specified that women were entitled to a share of virgild if they were harmed. Women could testify at the thing. Women managed entire households and farms while men were away raiding or trading, and their authority over those holdings was legally recognized. This does not mean Norse society was egalitarian. It was still deeply patriarchal in structure. Women could not serve as chieftains or law speakers, and their legal agency operated primarily within the domestic sphere. But compared to the rest of medieval Europe, where women were often treated as property with no legal standing whatsoever, the Viking Code offered women a degree of autonomy that would not be seen again on the continent for centuries. In England, at the same time, a woman's legal identity was effectively absorbed into her husband's upon marriage. In much of Frankish Europe, women could not own land independently. The Norse system, for all its violence and brutality, recognized that a household required two authorities, and that the woman who managed the keys to the storeroom, the livestock, the servants, and the daily survival of the farm was not a dependent. She was a partner with legal standing. Now there is one more dimension of the Viking Code that must be understood: the distinction between killing and murder. In the modern world, killing another human being is a crime, period. In the Viking world, the act of killing was not automatically criminal. What mattered was how it was done. If a man killed another man in daylight, in front of witnesses, and immediately declared what he had done, this was considered an honorable killing. It was not murder. The killer was expected to present himself to the nearest farmhouse and announce the deed. He then had to appear before the thing and accept whatever fine or compensation was imposed. The logic was rooted in the most fundamental value of Norse culture: responsibility. A man who stood behind his actions, who did not hide or run, who accepted the consequences of what he had done, was acting with honor. The killing might still cost him dearly in virgild, but he remained a member of society. Murder, by contrast, was defined as a killing done in secret, a killing where the perpetrator fled, hid the body, or refused to admit what had happened. This was considered the act of a nightinger, a man too cowardly to face the consequences of his own violence, and the punishment for murder was far harsher than for an honest killing. Murder could result in full outlawry. The man who killed in secret was treated worse than the man who killed in open combat, because the secret killer had violated the single principle on which everything else depended: honesty. Theft occupied a similar position. In many modern legal systems, theft is a property crime, serious but not catastrophic. In Viking society, theft was considered worse than killing. The reason was the same. A thief operates in secret. He takes without admitting it. He lies by his silence. He refuses to stand behind his actions. For the Vikings, this was not a minor moral failing. It was a fundamental corruption of character. A man who would steal could not be trusted with anything. Not an oath, not a deal, not a friendship. He was already a nightinger. Death by hanging was reserved for these men. Execution by beheading was considered the honorable way to die, the method used for those who had committed serious crimes but still retained their status as human beings. Hanging was deliberately shameful. It was designed to deny the condemned any chance of entering Valhalla. A man who died on the gallows did not die a warrior's death. He died a dog's death. And in the Viking world, that distinction mattered more than the death itself. By the 11th century, the Viking Code began to change. Christianity was spreading across Scandinavia, carried by missionaries and enforced by kings who saw the new faith as a tool of centralized authority. With it came new ideas about sin, punishment, and the power of monarchs. Written law codes replaced the oral traditions of the law speakers. Centralized royal power replaced the communal authority of the thing. The holmgang was abolished. The old ways of settling disputes with blades and blood gave way, slowly, to something closer to the legal systems we recognize today. But the transformation was not clean. For decades, the old and new systems existed side by side, creating a world where a man might be judged by both Christian morality and pagan honor, where a killing might be both a sin and a legal right, where a woman's divorce might be granted by the thing but condemned by the church. And in that tension lies the real legacy of the Viking Code. It was not a primitive system stumbling toward civilization. It was a fully formed legal philosophy built on principles that still resonate today. Community participation in governance, compensation over incarceration, the accountability of leaders to the same laws that governed everyone else, the idea that justice is not handed down from above, but emerges from the people who must live under it. Iceland's Althing still exists. It is the longest-running parliament in the world, having met nearly continuously since 930 AD. The legal traditions of the thing shaped the governance of every Scandinavian country. The Norwegian guilleting and frostating assemblies laid the groundwork for constitutional principles that persist in Scandinavian law to this day. Some historians argue that the foundations of modern parliamentary democracy can be traced directly back to these assemblies, where free men gathered in open fields, recited the law from memory, and decided the fate of their neighbors with their own voices. The Viking Code was brutal. Yes, it was personal. It demanded things of its people that no modern legal system would dare to ask. But it worked. For 300 years, across some of the harshest environments on Earth, it held together a civilization that explored, traded, fought, and settled more of the known world than any other culture of its time. They did not call it justice. They called it custom. In Old Norse, the word was sider. And when Christianity arrived and asked them to abandon the old ways, they had a name for that too. They called it nýr siður, the new custom. And the system it replaced? They called it forn siður, the ancient custom, a custom where your word was the law, where your honor was your life, and where the worst thing that could happen to you was not a blade across your throat, but the silence of a community that no longer recognized your name. If this journey into the Viking world fascinated you, subscribe. Every week we go deeper into the history that shaped civilizations and the codes that governed them. Click the video on screen now to continue.